At the dead of night, would you stop to help a stranger on an empty highway? Tyler pulled in for a simple rest-stop break until a stranger's wide smile and empty parking spot made every instinct scream. The man asked for help with a car that wasn't there, and the air felt too still for comfort. Highways at night can turn routine drives into something else entirely. Each mile is a gamble where the urge to help can put you in real danger. Would you trust your gut or risk becoming another roadside horror story? Sometimes the real threat isn't what you see, but what you sense waiting in the dark. Rachel's hands tightened around the steering wheel as her car hugged the narrow curves of the $1 Million Highway. In the daylight, this stretch of US Route 550 always seemed almost inviting. She'd admired the jagged cliffs and sweeping mountain views on countless trips. But now, after midnight, the world outside her headlights felt different. Darkness pressed in from all sides, swallowing the road and turning every mile into a test of nerves. The heater's hum and dashboard's glow offered little comfort. A chill crept up her arms, and the silence grew heavy, isolating her in a way she hadn't felt before. The highway's reputation for danger was never far from her mind. Rachel tried to focus on the familiar, her hands on the wheel, the faint lines of the road, the digital clock counting down the minutes until she'd see the lights of home. The only sound was the wind threading through the window seals. It was the kind of quiet that made every small sound, the crunch of gravel under her tires, the snap of a branch somewhere beyond the shoulder, seem amplified and close. She was rehearsing the last stretch of the drive in her mind when a shape appeared ahead, just barely visible at first. It might have been a trick of the fog or her own tired eyes, but it resolved into something solid as she drew closer. Rachel eased off the gas, squinting through the haze as her headlights swept across the shoulder. There was a car sitting at an odd angle, half buried in the gravel, hood popped open. No hazard lights, no sign of another vehicle nearby. Just the dull, slumped outline of a sedan, its windows reflecting her own lights back at her in a blank, glassy stare. She slowed almost to a stop. The unease she'd felt earlier sharpened, settling low in her stomach. Most drivers might have kept going, but Rachel's curiosity and the lonely stretch of road got the better of her. She scanned the scene for movement, for any sign of life. Then, from the edge of the abandoned car, a figure lurched into her headlights. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, bundled in a green jacket, hood pulled up. He moved awkwardly, one hand pressed to his side as if he was hurt or exhausted. He raised his other hand in a shaky wave, the gesture more desperate than friendly. Rachel's pulse quickened. She watched him approach, her mind racing through possibilities. Was he in trouble? Was this some kind of setup? When he spoke, his voice barely carried over the hum of her engine. "They're out there," he said, the words raw and urgent. He coughed, then repeated himself louder. "They're out there." The man's eyes darted up and down the highway, and he pointed back into the darkness, his whole body tense. Rachel hesitated, not rolling down her window, but not driving off either. His focus never left the road behind her. He wasn't asking for a ride or gas or even help with the car. There were no questions about jumper cables or a phone, just the same warning pressed tight between his teeth. "Please, they're going to find me." His hand shook as he gestured, and Rachel could see the strain in his face, the way he leaned forward as if every muscle was stretched to its limit. She glanced at the car again, searching for anything that might explain the scene. That's when she noticed the tires, cleanly slashed, all 4 of them. Not blown out, not worn down, but cut in a way that left no doubt. Proof this wasn't a stranded driver's simple misfortune. The realization sent a jolt through her. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this on purpose. Psychological analysis of Rachel's ordeal shows staged breakdowns prey on empathy and isolation. Exactly what she faced at 2 a.m. on the $1 Million Highway. The man's warnings, the slashed tires, the abandoned car, each detail layered on top of the next until the story no longer made sense as a simple roadside emergency. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but the urge to help pulled just as hard. She weighed her choices, both of them bad. If she rolled down her window or got out, she'd be exposed. If she ignored him, she'd feel the guilt of leaving someone behind. She pictured news stories, warnings from friends, all the things people say about stopping for strangers at night. Rachel's fingers hovered over the gear shift, torn between action and retreat. The man's hand dropped to his side, and for a second, he looked almost defeated. He didn't shout or chase her car as she put it into drive. He just stood there, the hollow exhaustion in his posture making him look smaller in the harsh light. Rachel pressed the gas, her heart pounding as she pulled away. The highway stretched out in front of her, empty but for the memory of the encounter. Each bend in the road seemed sharper. Every shadow at the edge of her vision lingered longer than it should. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or a figure running after her. But there was nothing, only the fog swallowing the road behind her. His voice echoed in her mind. "They're out there." She didn't know who he meant, or if anyone was actually following. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. Rachel forced herself to focus on the road, on the next mile, on getting home. She didn't look back. The rest of the drive passed in fragments, her eyes flicking to the clock, her hands aching from their grip on the wheel, her breath fogging the window. She replayed the encounter over and over, searching for something she missed. The slashed tires, the abandoned car, the man's warning. It all felt like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, the tension in her shoulders hadn't eased. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, letting the engine idle. She tried to convince herself that she'd made the right choice, that whatever was waiting out there on the highway wasn't her problem anymore. But the feeling of unease lingered, a reminder that sometimes danger isn't obvious until you're already too close. Rachel would never know what might have happened if she'd stopped to help, or if she'd ignored every instinct and gotten out of the car. The road behind her was gone, swallowed by the night and the mountain fog. But she carried the memory of that encounter with her, a quiet warning that not every stranger on the roadside is what they seem. Somewhere else, at nearly the same hour, another driver faced a different test of instinct and caution. Tyler pressed his palm to his face, rubbing at the exhaustion that had settled in after hours behind the wheel. The dashboard clock glowed 1:47 a.m. He'd left the city late, the meeting dragging on well past dinner, and now the interstate felt emptier than he remembered, just the steady hum of tires and the occasional flicker of headlights in the distance. He never liked driving at this hour. The quiet was too complete, the world outside his windshield too still to feel comfortable. A rest stop sign appeared through the fog, its blue and white colors washed out by the haze. He didn't hesitate. He needed a break, maybe a few minutes to stretch and clear his head before the last leg home. The parking lot was deserted, only a few trash cans and a vending machine station standing in the pale glow of overhead lights. Tyler pulled into a space along the far edge, engine idling as he let his eyes adjust to the dimness. His suit jacket looked rumpled and out of place on the passenger seat. He reached over to straighten it, the familiar motion grounding him for a moment. He stepped out, the cold air sharper than he expected. It clung to his skin and made him wish he'd brought a heavier coat. The fog rolled around his ankles as he walked toward the vending machines, his footsteps muffled on the concrete. He fished for gum in his pocket and tried to convince himself the rest stop was just like any other. Quiet, empty, nothing to worry about. Most people were asleep by now, and the only sound was the low hum of the building's lights. He leaned down to press the buttons on the soda machine, trying to focus on the simple task. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Slow, uneven, close enough to make him freeze. His fingers hovered momentarily over the keypad, and he listened, every muscle tensed. The sound was too deliberate to ignore. "Need some help there?" The voice was right behind him, closer than he'd realized. Tyler straightened, turning to see a man standing only a few feet away. The man was tall, his hands pushed deep into the pockets of a black hoodie, the hood pulled up so his face was mostly in shadow. The smile came next, wide, too quick, and it didn't move past his mouth. "Sorry, man. Didn't mean to spook you," the man said, his tone casual but practiced. The smile stayed fixed, as if he'd rehearsed it. "Thought you might have been in a jam." Tyler forced a quick laugh. "No, I'm good. Just grabbing a drink." He tried not to look away, but the stranger's eyes didn't leave him. "That's good. That's real good." The man shifted on his heels, glancing at the machine Tyler had been using. "Funny coincidence. I was just about to ask for some help myself." Tyler waited, hoping the man would lose interest, but the silence stretched. The man gestured vaguely behind them, toward the empty stretch of parking lot. "It's my car," he said, as if Tyler should have noticed it already. "Dead battery. Been sitting over there for, what, an hour? Maybe more. Not a single driver's come through this whole time." But Tyler could see no car where the man claimed to be stranded. The lot behind them was empty, just the fog and the weak glow from the lights. The request hung in the air. A jump start wasn't much to ask, but the way the man said it made Tyler uneasy. Something about his tone, the way his smile never faded, put Tyler on edge. "You know," the man said, lowering his voice, "it's not safe out here. Lot of weirdos on the road." The words felt less like a warning and more like a reminder. The man took a step forward, not enough to close the gap, but enough to make Tyler feel boxed in. Tyler's heart picked up. He glanced at the vending machine, then at the man's hands, still buried in the hoodie's pockets. The fog made the world feel smaller, and Tyler's instincts sharpened. Security reports note that criminals often pose as stranded motorists at rest stops, using a friendly tone to lure help, an exact tactic Tyler faced now. He remembered reading about it, how people could be targeted just for stopping in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man's persistence, the missing car, the way he tried to create a sense of shared risk, it all fit together in a way that made Tyler's skin crawl. Tyler started, but the words caught in his throat. The man stepped forward again, his hand twitching inside his pocket. Tyler felt the urge to apologize, to say something polite, but every instinct screamed at him to get away. He backed up, moving slowly at first, then faster as the man's eyes followed him. Tyler mumbled something he couldn't remember later, maybe an excuse, maybe just a noise. He reached his car, pulled the door open and slid inside, locking it behind him. The man didn't move, just watched as Tyler started the engine and reversed out of the parking space. As he pulled away, Tyler glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man's car materialize out of the fog. There was nothing, just the empty lot, the vending machines, and the stranger standing alone in the same spot. The rest of the drive, Tyler's mind replayed the encounter in a loop. The man's smile, the missing car, the way he'd said, "Lot of weirdos on the road." It stuck with him, louder than the sound of tires on pavement. He wondered how close he'd come to something he couldn't explain away. The wrong exit at the wrong hour, a stranger with a story that didn't add up, and a decision that felt more important the farther he got from that rest stop. The highway stretched on, mile after mile. Tyler kept checking his mirrors, the memory of the man's words lingering in the quiet. Sometimes a simple stop can change everything. Night driving has a way of making the familiar feel strange. For some, the real threat isn't what's waiting at a rest stop. It's what follows you back onto the open road. Jessica drummed her fingers once on the steering wheel, the sound swallowed by the steady rush of the tires and the open desert pressing in from all sides. She'd driven US Route 191 before, but something about the emptiness at this hour made the road feel different. The radio had lost its signal miles back, leaving her alone with the hum of the engine and her own thoughts. The last stretch to campus always dragged, especially when fatigue started to settle in behind her eyes. At first, the headlights behind her barely registered, just a faint glow in the mirror, easy to ignore. But soon, there were 3 sets, all moving together. Jessica watched as the distance closed, the lights multiplying and growing brighter. They didn't speed up to pass, didn't fall back. Instead, they kept perfect formation, their beams lined up in an even row. She shifted in her seat, trying to shake off the tight feeling building in her chest. She glanced again, trying to make out the details. The first vehicle was a white van, its shape sharp and boxy even through the haze. The second, a dark SUV, kept close to the van's right flank. The third looked like a battered pickup, one headlight flickering. Their movement wasn't random. Each time she adjusted her speed, the convoy matched her, never closing the gap but never letting her pull away. It felt like choreography, every move deliberate. Her father's advice echoed. Find any exit. Up ahead, a dirt track beckoned through the fog, barely visible in the sweep of her headlights. The urge to take it warred with the fear of leaving the main road. She kept her eyes forward, but her hand hovered near her blinker, pulse thumping in her wrist. Jessica's agitation grew. She pressed her palms against the wheel, trying to keep her breathing steady. The road ahead was empty, no lights or signs for miles. She checked her phone. Dead zone, GPS frozen. The only company was the convoy behind her, each vehicle holding its place in a way that felt too precise. The white van shifted, moving up to her left. The SUV settled into her right blind spot. The pickup dropped back, closing the triangle. Jessica's mind raced. This wasn't normal tailgating or a random cluster of late-night drivers. The pattern was too controlled. Researchers have documented cases where multiple vehicles box in a single car on remote roads, just like Jessica's experience on Route 191. The tactic is meant to isolate, to make the target feel powerless. She tried slowing down, hoping they'd pass. They slowed too. She sped up, and they matched her. The white van's driver wore dark glasses, eyes hidden, face blank and unreadable. The SUV's lights stayed just out of reach, never quite pulling alongside. The pickup's flickering headlight bounced in the rear view, steady as a heartbeat. Jessica's thoughts spiraled through news stories and warnings. Losing control of your environment, being forced to react on someone else's terms, twisted her instincts tight. The desert felt endless, the silence outside her car pressing in. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the road and the faint click as she gripped the wheel harder. The dirt track appeared again, closer now. It split off at a sharp angle, marked only by a leaning wooden post and a scatter of rocks. She weighed her options. Stay on the main road and risk whatever the convoy had planned, or take the turn and hope the rough path would shake them. The decision settled in her gut before she could talk herself out of it. She flicked the blinker and cut right, tires sliding over the loose gravel. The car jolted, headlights bouncing as she left the asphalt behind. She didn't look back right away, afraid to see if the convoy followed. The dirt path narrowed, brush scraping the sides of her car. Her focus tunneled down to the road in front of her, hands tight on the wheel. After a few minutes, the path widened. Jessica risked a glance in the mirror. Nothing. The headlights were gone, the rumble of engines replaced by the hush of the desert. Relief hit in a slow wave, her arms shaking as she loosened her grip. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She kept driving until the dirt road curved back to a small paved highway, a few scattered lights visible in the distance. When she finally rejoined civilization, the tension eased but didn't leave. Her phone buzzed back to life, GPS stuttering into place. She considered calling her dad, but the words stuck. She already knew what he'd say. Trust your gut. You did the right thing. Jessica merged into the next lane, the memory of the convoy still sharp in her mind. The desert faded behind her, but the sense of vulnerability lingered. She watched the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights appear again, but the road stayed empty. Not every threat on the highway is obvious. Sometimes it's the silence and the calculated distance that tell you something's wrong. Jessica's escape left her with more questions than answers, but it also left her wary of the dark stretches between towns, where help is far away and trust is a gamble. On another lonely highway, as the night pressed in, someone else would soon face a choice just as uncertain. Mark rubbed the corner of his eye with the back of his thumb. The steady hum of the tires a thin thread against the silence pressing in from all sides. U.S. Route 2 in northern Montana stretched ahead in a straight line, the darkness broken only by the reach of his headlights. It was late, and the moon hung low, barely bright enough to make out the frozen fields beyond the ditches. The landscape felt endless and empty, and each mile home seemed to take longer than the last. He tried to focus on the road, and not the way the cold crept through the seams of the window, or the ache in his shoulders from a week of bad sleep and worse coffee. A shape on the shoulder broke the monotony. At first it looked like a trick of the light, a shadow caught at the edge of his vision. As he drew closer, the outline sharpened into a car. A small sedan slumped at an awkward angle with its nose in the dirt. The hazard lights blinked, one of them struggling to keep up, the other steady as a metronome. Mark slowed, eyes moving from the car to the figure standing by the hood. A woman waved, her arm stiff and mechanical, the other hand holding a phone close to her chest. She looked young, maybe early 20s, dark hair spilling from the hood of an oversized sweatshirt. Her stance was tight, shoulders hunched against the cold. As Mark rolled up, his headlights washed over her face, making her look even paler in the harsh light. She glanced at him, then over her shoulder toward the darkness behind her. He eased off the gas, letting the car crawl forward. Her phone lay dead, her car's hazards still blinking, proof she'd been waiting long enough to know help wouldn't just appear. The car itself looked battered. The hood was out of alignment, the passenger mirror dangled by its wires, and the back fender was scraped. Mark kept his hands on the wheel, watching her movements. She looked relieved and nervous at the same time, her eyes never staying on him for long. He rolled down the window halfway, letting a blast of cold air into the car. "You all right?" he called out. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. The woman took a half step forward, but she didn't get too close. "It won't start," she said, her voice thin and rough. "Battery's dead. I've tried everything. I just need a ride into town to call someone." She nodded toward the phone in her hand, as if to prove her point. Mark glanced at the hazards again, then at her face. Something about the scene didn't add up. The hazards were still going, and if she'd been stuck for long, she should have tried to flag down another car or walk toward the nearest light. He looked past her, scanning the stretch of highway behind the car. There was nothing but blackness. He kept his tone neutral. No signal out here. She shook her head, her eyes flicking away, then back. Nothing. I've been out here a while. She pressed the phone tighter to her chest, glancing over her shoulder again. The movement was sharp, almost fearful, like she expected something to come out of the darkness at any second. Mark's mind worked through the possibilities. He wanted to help. But her story was thin, and her nervous glances at the empty highway behind her made him uneasy. Decoy setups like this exploit drivers' empathy. Cases documented where stranded motorists were lures for traps. He remembered reading about situations where a plea for help was just the beginning, not the end. He watched her for another second, weighing the risk. "I'm sorry," he said, keeping his voice low. "I can't stop long. I hope someone else comes by soon." He didn't take his eyes off her as he spoke. Her face changed. For a moment she looked frustrated, not surprised. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but she closed it again. She glanced behind her one more time, the motion quick and anxious. Mark's gaze followed hers, searching the shadows at the edge of the highway. He caught a flicker of movement, a shape shifting in the dark, just outside the reach of his headlights. It was gone in a second, but it was enough. He felt the urge to leave, his hand tightening on the gear shift. "Good luck," he said, rolling the window up. He didn't wait for a response. He put the car in gear and pulled away, picking up speed faster than usual. In the rearview mirror he saw her standing there, her figure shrinking in the distance, the hazards still blinking. A minute later, headlights shot to life behind him. A dark SUV pulled onto the highway, accelerating fast. The high beams cut through the dark, filling his mirrors with white light. Mark's pulse jumped. He gripped the wheel, eyes flicking between the road and the mirror. The SUV closed the distance, its engine a low roar that grew louder with each second. He pressed the accelerator, trying to keep the car steady as the road curved through the empty fields. The SUV stayed with him, matching every turn, never dropping back. The chase stretched on, the empty highway offering nowhere to hide. Mark's mind raced through every possible outcome, each one worse than the last. When the SUV's glare vanished, Mark realized he'd escaped, though the woman's terrified glance stayed with him. He kept driving, not slowing down until the first lights of town appeared on the horizon. His hands shook as he pulled into his driveway, the memory of the encounter replaying in his mind. The fear didn't fade with the engine's silence. He thought about the woman's face, the way she kept looking behind her, and the feeling that no choice he made would have been truly safe. On the last mile home, the rules he thought he knew about helping others and protecting himself blurred together. The highway was quiet again, but the sense of danger lingered. Mark sat in the car for a long time before going inside, trying to convince himself the threat was gone. The questions about what he should have done and what might have happened if he'd made a different choice stayed with him. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the moment itself, but the uncertainty it leaves behind. The line between empathy and survival is thin, and every decision on the road can change how you see strangers and yourself long after the drive is over. On the open highway, far from city lights or the comfort of a familiar route, the question of whether to help a stranger becomes more than a simple moral test. It is a moment where empathy collides with self-preservation, and the answer is never as clear as you want it to be. Each of the stories you've just heard turns on this conflict, the urge to trust and the need to protect yourself, set against a backdrop of isolation and uncertainty. These are not just tales about what people did in a moment of fear, but about how those moments shape the way they see the world long after the road is behind them. Rachel's drive on the $1 Million Highway forced her to choose: listen to a stranger's desperate warning or keep herself safe from a threat she couldn't name. Tyler, at the empty rest stop, weighed the polite thing against the prickling sense that something was wrong and chose to walk away. Jessica, boxed in by a silent convoy on Route 191, trusted her instincts and took a dirt road to escape. Mark, on the frozen plains of Montana, saw the warning signs in a stranded woman's story and decided not to stop, only to be chased by headlights that appeared out of the dark. These decisions didn't come from nowhere. Psychologists studying split-second threat assessment find that our gut reactions to subtle cues often guide us more reliably than conscious reasoning. In each story, the setting, whether a deserted mountain pass, a foggy rest stop, a stretch of desert highway, or a lonely rural road, stripped away the usual safety nets. There were no crowds, no backup, no easy way to call for help. The protagonists had only their own judgment to rely on. The vastness and emptiness of these places amplified every detail. A smile that didn't reach the eyes, a car that shouldn't have been there, headlights that moved in sync. These were the signs that something was off, and in the silence, those details became impossible to ignore. The psychological aftermath of these encounters is just as real as the danger itself. For Rachel, the memory of the man's warning lingered, turning a familiar drive into a source of anxiety. Tyler found himself replaying the rest stop encounter, wondering if he'd really escaped a threat or just let his fears get the better of him. Jessica's relief at escaping the convoy was tangled up with the knowledge that she might never know what the drivers wanted. Mark, after being pursued by the SUV, sat in his driveway trying to convince himself that the danger was over, but the unease didn't fade. Moral ambiguity runs through each story. There's no single right answer, no way to know for sure if helping would have put them in danger or if walking away left someone truly in need. This uncertainty is what makes these situations so haunting. The road becomes a place of constant assessment, where every stranger is a question and every decision carries weight. The loneliness of these highways makes each choice feel more urgent, and the consequences more personal. Isolation is a force multiplier. When you're alone, the risks feel sharper and the stakes higher. The settings themselves, empty highways, deserted rest stops, endless fields, strip away the comfort of witnesses or quick exits. In these places, the instinct to survive can override the desire to help, even when that choice feels wrong. The fear doesn't always come from what's in front of you. Sometimes it's the possibilities that your mind fills in. The sense that anything could happen and no one would know. Manipulation is a real threat, and the stories show how easily empathy can be used against you. A plea for help, a story that almost makes sense, a situation that looks just believable enough. These are the tactics that turn compassion into vulnerability. The research behind these cases documents how quickly a roadside encounter can become a setup. The protagonists in these stories had to recognize the signs and act, often with only seconds to decide. But the impact doesn't end when the drive is over. The uncertainty lingers. The next time they see a car with hazards blinking on the shoulder or a figure waving for help, the memory of what happened, or almost happened, colors their reaction. The road, once a symbol of freedom, becomes a place where trust is rationed and every choice is second-guessed. Each story leaves the same question hanging. Did they do the right thing? Did they keep themselves safe? Or did they let fear win? The answer is rarely satisfying. The line between empathy and survival is thin, and it shifts with every new encounter. Sometimes the only thing you can trust is the feeling in your gut, the sense that something is off, even if you can't explain why. That instinct is shaped by experience, by the stories you've heard and the ones you've lived. For viewers, these stories are more than cautionary tales. They are reminders of how quickly an ordinary situation can change, and how important it is to pay attention to the details that don't fit. They also show that the scariest part isn't always the obvious threat, but the uncertainty that follows. The wondering, the what-ifs, the uneasy feeling that you'll never know for sure if you made the right call. In the dark, every car, every cry for help becomes a gamble. How would your instincts drive your choice? The loneliest roads in America remind us that the most unsettling dangers are often the ones we can't see. From slashed tires to silent headlights, these highways teach one lesson: never trust what you can't clearly see. Rachel, Tyler, Jessica, and Mark each faced a moment where the line between helping and protecting themselves blurred, and the uncertainty of what came next stayed with them long after their drives ended. Tell us in the comments. If a stranger waved you down at midnight, would you stop or drive on? Remember, on America's loneliest roads, the unknown can be the deadliest companion.